below. Enjoy. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Lowe, a former gymnast, coach, and the author of Overcoming Gravity, a systematic approach to gymnastics and bodyweight strength, and overcoming poor posture. Stephen holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and Doctorate of Physical Therapy from the University of Maryland and has spent thousands of hours independently researching the scientific foundations of health, fitness, and nutrition. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on the show.
Well, listen, I'd love to start by asking you about how you got into gymnastics and how that dovetailed into physical therapy.
So when I was younger, my parents put me in gymnastics and it was fun. But around about 10 or 11, I quit. But then in college, I took it up again with Gymkhana, which is a exhibitional and performance gymnastics troupe, which goes around to schools in the area promoting a drug-free life. And then after that, I started to seriously train myself. So I got in training with Mad Cow's old GeoCities site, which was for barbells, but then I applied a lot of the concepts to gymnastic strength training. And then I also got into coaching as well. So from there, then I was interested after college in physical therapy. So I got into that and wrote the book actually during physical therapy school. And so here we are now.
Awesome. Well, listen, Overcoming Gravity, fantastic book. It's definitely one that I've been back and forth through all the so much depth and so many layers to it. So maybe we can kick things off here by just talking about some fundamental principles of bodyweight training.
Yeah, so bodyweight strength training is a bit different than weights in that you can't necessarily add weight to a barbell. Instead, with bodyweight training, you usually change the body position or change the leverage, which means to either put the muscles into a shortened or lengthened position to make the exercise harder. Also, you can add weights like through a weighted vest or weights in a backpack, but that's also an alternative to that. And so what you do with usually changing the body position is, you see gymnasts doing or calisthenics athletes doing, planches, front levers, usually work out from, a more tucked position to a more open body, straight body position. What that does, it, moves your center of mass away from your shoulders, which increases the torque at the shoulders. So basically increases the strength requirement of the exercise.
Awesome. And of course, working the various movements, specifically, we're getting into that said principle, obviously, of specificity in terms of just repeating certain movements to be able to get fitter and stronger. And of course, that progressive overload, which you mentioned, you can change body positions, etc. Now, how about some progressions with bodyweight training? Can you describe the differences between some inter and intra exercise progressions?
Yeah, so intra exercise progressions means within a progression. So with bodyweight exercises, one of the most common ways to do that is obviously to increase the repetitions you're doing of an exercise. So, if you go to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 reps, you're obviously getting stronger at the exercise. And then some of the inter-exercise progressions are about learning how to move up from an easier progression, such as a tuck position, to a straddle position, or a straddle position to a straight body position. So, for example, one could move from, a straddle one-arm push-up to a straight body one-arm push-up to make it much more difficult. And some of the ones that I like for intra-exercise progression are just either increasing the reps through increasing them for each set, or if you can't do that and your progression is slowing down a bit, you could do it maybe for one set, and then the next set, the next workout, and then the next set. So what it would look like is a 5 rep, 3 sets of 5, then maybe one set of 6 with 2 sets of 5, and 2 sets of 6 with 1 set of 5, and so on. Alternatively, there are some other ones such as adding additional sets, going up from 3 to 4 to 5 sets if you need additional volume to create that training stimulus. Using rest pause techniques such as resting 5 to 10 seconds after you complete a set to do a couple extra reps, changing up the tempo of the exercise by going slower, faster, or changing the density of exercise, which means lowering the rest times. So you do more volume in a certain period of time. And one of my personal favorites is last set to failure. So you just do your regular sets, and then on the last set, you go to failure. So it basically gives you an indicator of how much you can do overall in terms of basically your overall work capacity and strength as your work capacity increases. So, for example, if you're on 2 sets of 5, and then in your last set you can do 7, 8, 9, 10 reps, or at least 2 reps over your current set, then you can bump up like a progression next time.
Yeah, it's incredible how handy it can be, obviously, to just be, for folks who are really busy, difficult time carving out extra time to go to even the gym and stuff. You can do a tremendous amount of work, obviously, just at home, and even, using those weekly measures of even volume to help with things like gaining lean muscle and hypertrophy. And, in your experience, do you find, are there differences between sort of upper and lower body hypertrophy when you get to like a body weight based training strategy?
Yeah, so what I found personally, and what echoes a lot of the experience of various gymnastics and calisthenic athletes, is that barbells tend to be the best in terms of strength and hypertrophy for legs and maybe core as well. But you can get comparable strength with body weight or barbell exercises in the upper body, and fairly similar hypertrophy as long as you get enough volume with body weight exercises as with weights. However, weights may tend to be a little bit better since it's a bit more measurable in terms of, adding weight to the bar is much more easy and measurable than changing a progression. But overall, pretty comparable to upper body for the body weight exercises, and plus body weight exercises tend to be a lot more fun or inspiring to do as well.
For sure, and a lot more sort of compound movements and stuff, which is terrific as well. And when we talk about training frequency with bodyweight training, is there any differences there, let's say, between someone who's starting out with bodyweight training versus somebody who has more experience in gymnastics or more in an advanced trainee?
Yeah, so with bodyweight trainees, usually what I recommend personally, and what a lot of other people recommend, is similar to most beginning weight training programs, such as strength. About 3-ish times a week is pretty optimal for beginners. So you have that 48-hour rest period between your workouts, and then a 72 here and there. But as you get stronger and your work capacity increases, a lot of bodyweight strength trainers like to go up to 4 or 5 times a week as you improve. Just because as you get more practice with the movements, the stronger you'll get.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I remember Pavel Tatsulin's great book and talking about Grease the Groove, and just having repeated things like the handstand progressions and whatnot. It's amazing how after a few weeks into a month, all of a sudden the movement patterns and everything just feel really really nice when you're doing them so frequently, versus oftentimes even with gym work, people are doing things once a week, and you don't get the same kind of acceleration in terms of training progression.
Exactly. And, the more good or fresh practice you have with movements, the better your body learns it. And that's just like a lot of the neurological aspects of strength, like recruitment, synchronization, and rate coding. I think Dan John, who I'm not sure if you had on the podcast, but great strength coach, he recommends if something's important, you should do it every day. So that's a pretty good way to go about it, as long as you can handle the volume and not get overuse injuries, at least.
Yeah, I love that quote. Is really great. It hammers home a great point, and especially if people are used to doing weights-based routines in the gym and doing more of a classic kind of bodybuilder split or something, they're doing just, again, that once a week versus even like a powerlifting style, or obviously with the bodyweight training, you repeat the movement so often. It's really amazing to see kind of the progressions and just the difference of how the movements feel even after a few weeks to a month. And if we talk about, again, periodization, is there a best method for body weight training in your experience? Again, from beginners to some of the classic linear progressions to are there any differences with potentially advanced trainees?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a best method. As you know, a lot of periodization is aimed towards more advanced athletes. So I guess what periodization basically means is to quote unquote have a plan. So in terms of like that strict definition, yes, but as you're newer to exercise, pretty much everything works to get you stronger in the beginning.
Definitely.
But as your rate of progression slows, as you climb towards your genetic potential, obviously having a more structured plan tends to more easily give gains. So what I like doing after somebody can't use like the simple inter and intra exercise progressions is to get them onto some either light heavy periodization or daily undulated periodization, which helps them to so basically those are programs where you vary the reps between workouts. So what a light heavy would do is, on a heavy day, you would work closer to your 1 rep max. So like say 3 to about 8 rep max. And then on the lighter day, you'd work higher reps such as, 15, 10 to 15, or even up to 20 rep max. So with the lighter days, you're getting higher volume with lighter reps, which allows you a lot more practice with the movement and enough volume for hypertrophy. Whereas with the heavier days, you're getting more of the strength focus, more of the neurological component, which allows you to, gain that strength. So switching off between those days helps your neurological system to rest on the light day, whereas on the heavy day, you're, getting the strength focus and not so much volume. So you're not, putting yourself into overuse as well. And then daily undulated periodization going into, 3 days of varying, say light, medium, heavy. That allows you to push the progression out a bit more if you can't make progress on light, heavy, or something like that.
Yeah, great advice there. And I had Dr. Brad Schoenfeld on last year and talking periodization. And as you mentioned, this idea of it's being more a concept more than a rigid plan. And of course, this idea of having a training plan, having this overall goal that you're working towards, and then building your plan towards that goal. And the undulating periodization is a great model. And could you give maybe an example to listeners of how someone in a bodyweight setting could have a heavier day versus a lighter day? I know you sort of touched on it before with lever lengths, but maybe a concrete example would be great.
Yeah, so say you're working on the 1-arm push-up. What you could do for the lighter day is if you're able to do, pretty high reps of a straddle 1-arm push-up, you could do the straddle 1-arm push-up for the lighter day going for higher reps. And then if you're working on, the full 1-arm push-up with a straight body laid together, on the heavy day, you could work those reps. So basically, you don't necessarily have to, have a barbell where you're taking weights off for the lighter day and then piling on the weights for the heavy day. You just use an easier progression for the light day and a harder progression for the heavy or more intense day.
Yeah, it's definitely in your book you do a great job with the outlines and descriptions and pictures of the movements, because I think for some people who are not as familiar with bodyweight training or gymnastics-based training, it's amazing how you'll definitely feel right off the bat the intensity rise when you get into these 1-arm variations of a push-up. And I think for a lot of people it will tame their hubris a little bit in terms of their strength potential, because it's a lot more challenging than sometimes people will think. Now, we've touched on a few of the principles of training, obviously, things like specificity and overload, and of course, recovery is another key principle for successful training. How does deloading work in bodyweight training? Is there a common strategy that you like to use or something that's more beneficial to bodyweight training?
So for deloading, I tend to defer to some common, barbell principles in this for this area. And then also, I don't know if these are common barbell principles, but these are the principles that I like to use that are similar to barbell ones, I would say. So one of the ones I use is an intensity deload, which is you just basically move to previous progressions. So say you're working that full one arm push up, you could work easier progressions such as straddle arm push up, or even lighter, um, such as, two arm push ups, maybe with a little weight, or maybe unweighted, or like a hard progression if those are way too easy. And when you deload the intensity, you're basically going for more of a higher reps type of scheme in your deload week. And what that does is it's pretty good for overuse injuries, since overuse injuries tend to crop up when you're going, very heavy or have extremely high volume on very intense exercises. So if you're feeling kind of worn down, your joints are achy, it's generally good to deload the intensity. And then another one I like to use is a volume deload. So like, if you're still healthy, and your joints are feeling fine, you have no injuries, then generally you can just do a volume decrease. So what I like is either decreasing the volume by about half to maybe a third, in between about 1/3 and 2/3. So what that just looks like is, you're going to do your regular routine, except you subtract, 1 to 2 sets of each exercise.
Gotcha.
You're still practicing with the intense movements, so you're not going to lose any strength. But since you're dropping the volume by 1/3 to 2/3, your body is going to better be able to dissipate the fatigue that has accumulated over that training period.
Awesome. Yeah, we can allow for that sort of super compensation to take place, and then folks are getting stronger and perhaps adding some lean muscle mass and ready to jump into that next block of training. And of course, people are listening in and they want to get started on this stuff, or they've been thinking about it and maybe dipping their toe into it a little bit, but perhaps have some areas of stiffness or instability or imbalance. In terms of prehabilitation, what would someone, let's just say a desk worker, what are some things that they might want to include in their warm up, let's say, to even help to mobilize things and get ready for a bodyweight training routine?
Yeah, so bodyweight training uses a lot of more, I guess, full range of motion movements. So like a lot of overhead stuff like the handstand, or say back lever, which uses, range of motion where your arms are actually behind the body. So a lot of mobility and stretching for the chest, lats, and shoulder and torso muscles is good, because you're going to be moving into greater ranges of motion, unlike barbells a lot of the time. So you definitely want to be able to get used to that range of motion and be able to move within that range of motion comfortably before trying to develop strength in those ranges. And especially for tight athletes and desk workers, a lot of the common like hip flexor stretching, and just getting all the leg, hip, and core muscles moving and through a lot of greater range of motion is also useful as well.
Yeah, I found it's been really interesting because just having some goals of the different movements that you're trying to accomplish, it almost really prioritizes mobility, stability, and stretching to be able to achieve those positions and those movements. So even working with clients and patients, obviously sometimes stretching becomes a bit of an afterthought, or they don't put as much work in as they should do. But when you're working towards some of these movements or goals, it's just baked into the cake that you got to be able to achieve these positions. So I think that's a great quality and benefit a lot of the bodyweight training. And on that note, in terms of stretching, do you have any preferences in terms of a mix of static stretching, PNF stretching, loaded stretching? Where can people get some more benefit to help move themselves in the right direction?
Yeah, so let me go back to the prehabilitation stuff. So
For sure.
it's often the case that there's a lot of people who come into it with kind of pushing imbalances. So like they say went to the gym, but they only did a lot of beach muscle exercises like bench and curls. So
4 or
what
5
I've
times a
found
week.
exactly. So what I found works well to help balance that out is just to get an extra exercise of, say, horizontal pulling, such as rows or inverted rows, just to strengthen those back muscles up, catch them up to the push muscles. I recommend generally if somebody's like over pushed, has that over pushing that over pushing state, I guess, of excessive hypertrophy and strengthen the pushing muscles going forward, to get, a 2-to-1 or maybe a 3-to-2 ratio of pulling to pushing to help balance that out.
Definitely great advice.
All right, so for different forms of stretching, such as static, PNF, loaded, basically the goal is to ultimately get the nervous system to relax. So what that means is stretching helps to move the muscles into a greater range of motion, lengthen them, and the nervous system senses that as a threat generally. So it uses muscle spindles to tighten up the muscles once they start to lengthen, if the position seems dangerous. So stretching is more like a progression of relaxing the nervous system. So I kind of like to use static holds, PNF, and loaded stretching sequentially, where, if static holds don't work, then you can move to something a little bit more advanced like PNF. And if that doesn't work, you can move to something a little more advanced like load stretching.
And Steve, can you just describe PNF quickly for folks if they're not familiar with that?
Yeah, so PNF is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, and basically a complicated word to say that you're moving the muscle into an end range, and you're usually doing some contractions or holding there against a force, and then relaxing into new range of motion. And what that does is when the body is contracting against force in the range, it does two things, which is one, if you're firing motor units and then you turn them off, what the body does is it tends to relax overall more than if you had just stretched into the position. So basically it'll allow a bit more stretch, and strengthening at end range is generally correlated to being able to increase flexibility as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, the four factors that I like to look at that help increase flexibility is one, time spent at end range. The more time you spend stretching, the more your body is going to, since that's not a threat, and to accommodate into newer ranges of motion. Two is to aim to relax the nervous system. So deep breathing is a great way to help do that, especially while you're stretching. You're taking in that breath and then relaxing out to allow the body into the new range. Avoiding pain is important through the range, because pain tends to sensitize the muscle spindles. So if you're stretching into pain, usually you won't progress much, if at all, unless you're a very bendy kid,
Gotcha.
like a gymnastic.
So a little bit of discomfort's okay, but when you get into that pain area, that's too much. Is that it?
Yeah, I like to stretch into the range of discomfort and then accommodate there.
Perfect.
And then the fourth one is usually increasing strength through the total range of motion, especially end range. So loaded stretching does that fairly well. You're going through that full range of motion to the end range, and then the weight gives you that little bit to stretch a little bit further. So all those four concepts can be applied, with static, PNF, or loaded to help get you into that further range of motion and relax your nervous system and gain strength to end range.
Terrific. And, dovetailing off this a little bit into perhaps more specific to athletes, athletes who are already, training in their sport and obviously have strength and conditioning plans as well, but maybe want to be doing some things in their prehabilitative work or at home to be able to improve mobility and flexibility. And so, obviously being part of Canada Basketball, work with a lot of basketball players, so stiff and limited ankle mobility is a really common theme. Are there certain bodyweight-based or gymnastic-based movements that would help, prepare them or improve that ankle mobility?
So one of the ankle mobility exercises I actually picked up from track and field, and that's foot drills. There's 6 of them. Basically, you're walking on the outside of your foot, on the inside of your foot, on your toes, on your heels, and then also with your feet turned in and your feet turned out. And what those allow you to do is to build up the body awareness in the various positions because, when you're jumping, cutting, the load on your foot is not always going to be like in a straight line, like, running, jumping, or even stretching. So to have that body awareness and then, apply strength on that increased body awareness will definitely help to prevent injuries.
That's that's a great tip there. And shoes on, shoes off. Would shoes off even expedite some of that sensitization and proprioception with the brain?
Definitely shoes off to get the most effect. But then obviously, if you're playing shoes, then you also need to learn how to apply it to shoes. So, kind of both in that respect.
Terrific. And if we shift over to ice hockey players, again, another client base, I see a lot of tight hips as a classic one for these guys. Again, are there certain movements in gymnastics or bodyweight that would help, again, in this kind of prehabilitative or sort of extra bodyweight based work that a hockey player could use to help in terms of that hip mobility, stability?
Yeah. So bodyweight training towards things such as pistols or single leg squats is good. And one of the good exercises I like for that is Cossack squats. So those are the side to side squats where you bend one leg and keep the other straight. Those are usually good for getting mobility in one hip while stretching the adductors and tight muscles, adductors and hamstrings in the opposite hip. So that's a pretty good movement to assess somebody's overall, squat mobility as well as their straight leg ability. And then especially for hockey players who are like externally rotated all the time, pushing off the ice, it'd also be good just to assess external and internal range of motion with various stretches there. And then also think about how your core interacts with your pelvic girdle, since all those muscles cross over each other, like the hip flexors, the psoas, iliac psoas crosses over to the lumbar spine, and then the glutes cross the SI joint to the femur. So there's a lot of muscles interacting back and forth. So core, sometimes strengthening the core will actually allow you more mobility in the hip.
Yeah, that's great. A great idea, even as a movement screen as well. If you're working with new players or with assessing your current players through warm up and whatnot, the Cossack squat's fantastic. So I love that tip there. Now, if we shift over to something that's become obviously hugely popular in the last, I'd say, decade with CrossFit boom, is the handstands, handstand progressions, something that I see a lot of clients wanting to build up on their own now. So, how can someone build up to doing a freestanding handstand, and how long do you think it might take them to progress to that stage?
How long is a good question. If you're
tough one to answer, I'm sure.
If you come from a pretty athletic background, I've seen some people get it within a couple weeks. But if you're coming off as a couch potato, it may take you a couple months to. I've seen over a year, so it's pretty variable. One of the keys that most people don't really get is that it's your hands that are going to balance the forearm. So the weight you want to have distributed between your second knuckle and your first and second knuckles on your hands. So basically between your wrist and your fingertips. And what that allows you to do is, if you're falling over forward, you can dig your fingers in to keep your balance. But if you're falling over backwards, you can put the weight on your palms so that your center of mass is shifted back over your fingers to balance the movement. And people who understand this concept more rapidly get handstands than those who don't. So when we're talking about learning to do the handstands, one of the things that people first forget is they forget to learn how to bail from the handstand. So the handstand's a pretty novel movement where you're upside down, you're right side up most of the time. So
It's a bit of a change.
Right. So basically you need to learn to either roll out or pirouette out of the handstand. Getting comfortable with falling out of the handstand dissipates a lot of the fear that people have and the jumpiness of wanting to move their hands or balance with their shoulders. So learning that right off, just learning how to roll from a headstand or even just like a forward roll on the ground. Most people aren't totally comfortable with that. So once you learn how to do that or just fall to the side, land on your feet, that's one of the main first things. And I specifically put a lot of bail stuff in the book. So people would know how to do that with pictures.
Awesome. That's a great tip. Definitely good carpet, mats. On practicing on the beach is a great place to start, right?
Yeah, mat or even like a spotter can definitely help as well. Especially if somebody is familiar with gymnastics or handstands, they can help guide you as well. And then, so getting into progressions, what I like is back to the wall handstand first, just get people comfortable kicking up and upside down on their hands. And as they get used to that, switching more to a stomach to wall handstand where you walk your hands closer to the wall and get inverted in that position. And what that allows you to do is work on a straight body line for the handstand because as you straighten out the line, it's just more easy to use your hands and forearms to balance the handstand. If you're going to that arched banana shape, you're more likely to use your shoulders and your legs to kind of compensate for the balance instead of trusting your hands. And then once you're there, getting a solid 20, 30-second hold, you can go ahead and work on splitting your feet apart or kicking both feet slightly off the wall so you learn how to balance on your fingertips with your hands about 4 to 6 inches away from the wall. And as you get more comfortable with those holds, 10, 20 seconds, that's when you want to start learning how to kick up to a handstand away from the wall, work on balance. And then, as we get good at that, you're pretty much there. You just go to all kick up attempts. And one way to get used to freestanding in space is to do, once you're comfortable with stomach to wall handstands, is do it in a hallway. So, in a hallway, if you're facing one wall and your back's to the other wall, basically you're not going to tip over. If you start to fall over, your feet will hit the other side of the wall. Whereas your feet will hit the other side of the wall if you're starting to come down on your the walk up side.
Yeah,
So that allows you
to
that allows you to balance the handstand in a fairly safe range.
It's amazing how the brain plays a big role in this in terms of allowing you to really go into these things confidently, and knowing that walls behind you in a tight hallway is a really probably great tip to be able to make these progressions accelerate a little bit.
Exactly. And I mean, a coach or having somebody critique your technique is also one of those big ones because they can more easily spot things. Like it's very hard to tell where you are upside down and your body position. So, filming yourself so you can see what you're doing or getting a coach is always a great idea as well.
Absolutely, 100%. And, another movement, how about the one-arm chin-up? What are some key strategies there to be able to develop a one-arm chin-up that everyone's seen in the Rocky IV movies there and training in Russia?
So I like either a pulley assisted or eccentrics to build up to the one arm chin up, mainly because these utilize measurable progress. So with eccentrics, I like to build up to a 7 to 10 uniform speed eccentric, where you start at the top and then lower slowly down through the whole movement, and that tends to build up the strength well as the one arm control. And the alternative to that is pulley assisted concentrics. So basically, you have a pulley and you put a weight on the other end, and you hold the other end of the rope with your non-working arm. So basically, when you do the concentric movement where you're pulling all the way up to the bar, basically the one arm pull up. If you pull too much on the pulley, basically you're assisting too much. So
Gotcha.
if the weight doesn't move at all, you're assisting at 20 pounds or 15 pounds, and you can measurably work your way down to 0 pounds.
Awesome. And another, this is the ultimate, which I imagine takes a lot of time to build up to, is the iron cross. Obviously, one of the most impressive movements. Is this a quality that someone can realistically build up to, or is this going to take years of practice to be able to perform?
Generally, I put a lot of prerequisites for iron cross in there because it's very hard on the shoulder and elbow connective tissue. So I like a lot of the strainer movements, work on at least progression of the planche, front lever, and back lever before the cross, just so you're building up that connective tissue strength before you go on to something much more difficult. And then once you're working up to it, yeah, basically, I recommend, uh, basically doing it on rings. And the ideal is to get somebody to assist you through the movement, or if you can't do that, then you can use a pulley assisted mechanism as well, or do something like block cross pulls where your feet are on them to give you a little bit of assist there. But it's very tough on the connective tissues. So generally, most everybody will get a little bit of aggravation when training it. So people need to learn when to back off and work on the connective tissue and then work their way back into it as they progress. So it's kind of finding that fine line between too much volume and backing off between, and training it and working it slowly to progress it up.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like, obviously, listening to your body in terms of if the fatigue's building up to a higher level or much higher level, you're starting to get more of the aches and pains in the joints and overall fatigue's coming up, then maybe a time for a deload week. And you had mentioned rings there, and I know for myself, between using, let's say, a standard dip bars at a gym versus using rings, massive difference in terms of how it feels in the shoulders, and even holding isometrics in the bottom position just feels really good and helps to open up much more so than using kind of the standard equipment. Can you walk folks through why rings can be such a benefit for joints and mobility?
Yeah, so basically rings are in a frictionless plane where they'll just move to wherever the force is the least. So when you jump up and you have no idea what you're doing, they'll shoot out to the sides because you're not thinking about pulling in right away. So basically, since they allow this movement and rotation, your body has to turn on all your stabilizer muscles, like your rotator cuff and all those shoulder muscles to get to stabilize the ring, which is why joints can feel a lot better when using the ring sometimes than going to a pull-up bar. On the other hand, sometimes if somebody is a little more down the road toward injuries, if they can't turn on those stabilizers correctly, the instability can actually aggravate somebody's injury. So if that's
Gotcha.
you, and the rings are aggravating it, you might need some rehab for the stabilizer muscles that is not so advanced as rings.
So go see a practitioner, get some work done, and then you can revisit those.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why I like rings, especially for those with like elbow and shoulder tendonitis, actually not necessarily like rehabbing it, but getting back into training again, is because it doesn't lock you into a particular motion that the bar would do. So, if you're grabbing the bar, your elbows and shoulders are kind of locked into a specific position when doing a pull-up movement. So that movement and rotation of the rings allows your body to find a good movement pattern that fits your body and is not putting excessive particular stress at one joint because of the locked motion.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, definitely for myself, my shoulders after a lot of years playing baseball, a little cranky, and the rings have been definitely a game changer in terms of helping to help improve that and support that. So, I want to respect your time here, Steve. So, last couple of questions for you. I know you're a big fan of rock climbing and parkour. Can you talk about some of the qualities those activities could help people to improve on and to develop?
Yeah. So I'm from gymnastics to parkour to rock climbing, and I still go back to parkour and rock climbing. So a lot of this is just learning coordination for a lot of different movements, and learning and playing new sports is always good for the body to just keep the nervous system fresh and to build overall body awareness. I'm sure you've seen some of the studies where like learning and playing new sports and new movements, where the three sport athletes tend to get less injured than those playing one sport as they grow up, especially through
100%. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so just getting out of your comfort zone. It doesn't even have to be like crazy hard movements of a new sport. Just learning a lot of different movements, and just learning how your body moves in space and how your body moves, against the ground or say the rock climbing wall is beneficial to, get someone who has poor awareness to be aware of, okay, if you're falling, this is something you can do. You can learn how to roll. You can learn how to change the forces so you're not getting into potentially injurious positions. And then there's discipline as well. Going into a new sport, you're going to learn the discipline that it takes to, learn all the new movements, potentially how it takes to strengthen condition in that particular sport. So you'll definitely see a lot of similar qualities, across a lot of different sports where you're doing sport specific movements, and then you're doing strength and conditioning in the gym to support those sport specific movements, and then you're doing either energy systems or specific isolation work to shore up weak points for those specific sports. So just seeing all those different things and how they apply to different sports can help you, especially in your one sport that you're focusing on.
Great stuff, Steve. And if we can round things out here, maybe by giving us a little glimpse into your week, what does your training look like at the moment, and how do you drip feed in some of the body weight training in when you're busy in clinic or writing, etc.?
So I'm currently working on overcoming tendonitis as a main book. That's a huge project. Looked through hundreds of studies already, I'm working with another PT to assimilate that into hopefully a useful book for all parts of the body. So, Achilles, patellar, rotator cuff, elbow, medial, and lateral epicondylitis, and all those different tendinopathies.
Yeah,
and
golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, all those.
Exactly. And then I also train about 3 to 4 times a week. I usually climb and then do a bit of specific isolation work like hangboard. And then at the moment, I'm not going too hard on, gymnastics, bodyweight, strength-based exercises. I'm basically meaning to maintain those because when you're putting recovery into both a sport and strength and conditioning, it's very difficult. Usually you have to sacrifice one for the other. So right now I'm sacrificing bodyweight training for my improvement in climbing. And then, so basically I'm doing those two main things at the moment, and also doing my continuing ed for physical therapy.
Awesome. And maybe the last one here to round things out for folks. If you could give, a trainer or a practitioner or an athlete, someone who's trying to jump into bodyweight training for the first time, a tip, that 20% of the fundamentals that's going to give them sort of that 80% of the way home, what would that be in terms of for bodyweight training?
Definitely consistency and discipline. That is the core. If you're missing workouts here and there, you're just not going to progress effectively. And especially for bodyweight athletes, working high repetitions is very good to start for the first, couple months, because a lot of athletes, are really strong in the gym, and then they come over to body weight training and, really work up to those advanced movements really quickly. And since they're not used to a lot of straight arm work, the leverage or the torque on the tendons with the straight arm exercise is very high, so it very quickly leads to overuse. So just working a lot of high repetitions to build up that connective tissue strength, and maybe straight arm work such as German hangs, skin the cat type movements, and rings, supports, rings, straight arm work will help to build up those elbow and shoulder connective tissues, so that a couple months down the line you're not dealing with another case of tendonitis.
Awesome. Well, Steve, listen, great insights here, and tips for clients, athletes, trainers as well. Where can people stay connected with you, and where can people pick up some of your fantastic books?
So I'm over at stephenlow.org, and I'm also I also answer questions. Have a community over on Reddit called Overcoming Gravity. So reddit.com/r/overcoming gravity, and you can pick up both of my books on U.S. Amazon, I think the European Amazons, and the Canadian one. And then actually,